I always have to stop myself when someone says, I'm a Liverpool fan. Shame, I really liked you until that point. And I always say that you can't be what you can't see. People die twice. They die once when they take their last breath, and they die a second time when the last person says their name.
Again today, crack the world's problems, then we're on our way from the
Welcome to Football for Breakfast, presented by OSS Security. Our guest today has spent her career getting more women into aviation and has already moved the needle on female pilots from 4% to over 6% globally. Her name is Jane Hoskisson. Stick the kettle on, you're amongst good companions. Jane Hoskisson.
Jim, great to see you.
Sit yourself down. So, your breakfast order is a bacon butty.
Yeah,
of course. I'm reading Roy the Rovers, the 10th of June, 1982, and I don't know what drove the editors of Roy the Rovers at the time to lead with the fact that Roy's wife Penny has had a girl.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's a girl. And we know what to call her. What do you think they call their third child? Because Roy and Penny's first kids were twins.
Right.
So what do you think in 1982, in the summer of 1982, they called their daughter?
I'm going to go with Diana.
It is Diana. Right.
Easy guess.
But I do have to tell you this because I've just been reading it, right? So Roy missed the birth of his third child. He missed the birth of his third child.
What game was he playing in, watching?
Right. Well, right. So he raced to the hospital, Melchester General Hospital, in his red Lotus Esprit with the number plate Roy 1. Right. And there's Penny sitting up, and she says, "Relax, Roy. I could only manage one this time." Right, we've got another baby girl, right? So Roy missed, guess what Roy was doing?
Playing football, watching football.
No, right, because this is July,
no season.
Right, so Roy was playing a charity cricket match.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
He wasn't playing footy. Right, that's how important the birth of his third child was to him. Right, what's your earliest football memory?
Shocking. Well, I mean, going to watch Everton with my dad. I mean, absolutely, in the kind of early 80s, going to the matches with my dad, going to Goodison Park.
When you say the early 80s, are we talking, because Everton history in the 80s, it has a sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so you've got BH, which is before Howard, sort of DH, which is during Howard, and then there's after Howard. All of which has their own experiences. So when you started, are you before Howard or during Howard?
Right at the beginning of the Howard Kendall years, I would say, because that's what I remember most, going to those games around Goodison in the early 80s, 83, 84, 85.
So just when it was getting good?
Yes, amongst the last time it was getting good, I would say.
People forget, right, so I have this thing about Howard Kendall.
Yeah,
right.
Great manager.
I think he's one of British football's completely underrated managers. I mean, Everton have had some great managers in the time. I mean, in the period of my lifetime.
Yeah.
I think we've had maybe. I think Harry Category was just before I was born, but that was for most Evertonians of my era.
Yeah.
A memory of a league championship manager.
Yeah.
But Howard Kendall came at a time when Liverpool's dominance was omnipresent.
Yeah.
Right? And it wasn't an easy start. But then what he achieved was extraordinary.
Incredible, really incredible. I mean, it was a different kind of, and not easily replicated, right? That was, that was the challenge. But they are my earliest memories, those kind of very early 80s, going to the match, really having that sensation of being in this crowd. I mean, I was talking to my dad saying, that's such a formative memory because there's a pulsating sense when you go in a crowd like that. And as a 8, 9, 10-year-old,
A little girl,
you've never been in a crowd that big your entire life, and it's really, that's where your sense of tribalism comes from, because everybody is suddenly wearing a top that you resonate with because that's your team's top. And there's like an energy. I mean, I can feel it in my physically visceral response to the energy that pulsates as you're walking with the crowd, you're being buoyed along. And of course, I'm not much taller now. But I was little. And all
a
these
little girl. That's what I'm saying. A little girl. Yeah.
And the other sense that I have, and this is a really strong memory, is the police horses. And that is a really overriding memory, is like being aware that these police horses were there. They were there for the crowds. You know, but it was, gosh, this is an event that's kind of a really big deal.
It's funny that you mentioned the police horses, because my earliest footballing memories are probably two of Goodison Park. I seem to get tickets for games at Goodison probably easier than say Liverpool, Anfield or whatever. And so I went to a lot of games in the early 80s, Arsenal away games and whatnot. But the horse manure, right? The last place I expected to see horse manure, because we both grew up in the same town, right? And the road that I lived on, Blackie's Lane, right, was a big hill, right? And it was a former farmer's field. And at the top there was a stable, and so there was always horse manure on our road, because horses used to go down the road. So I was never particularly arrested by the sight of a police horse, right? But even now, when you go to the match, I'm sure they must still be there, but I can't recall the last time I saw a police horse at a football match.
But it's funny because even in the build-up, so even if we didn't go to the match with my dad, we would go and see my mum's family in Liverpool.
Right.
And my mum's sister lived in Everton, and you'd still see the horses going past in Everton. And that was like, it's all part of the kind of thing of going to football.
Allerton's not even that close to
No, but you'd see the horses go past.
So I wonder whether... Do you think that's where the stable was?
I don't know, I guess so.
So you saw the horses going past?
You'd see the horses on match day going past as you're going through kind of like Liverpool. You'd see those horses, and that was a really symbolic thing that it was.
Do you remember which area of the ground you stood in or sat in? Were you standing or seating? Standing.
So I've got early memories of standing, and I remember there would be the bar. And you'd be kind of put on the bar to try and see. But again,
behind the goal or at the side?
I think we were behind the goal. We would be sitting behind the goal or standing behind the goal. But again, you're small, and it's a really. But it wasn't. It's interesting because I've gone to the match with my dad. Many times since. You can feel that atmosphere is really different. Of course, the standing was, stopped, and and it's a different kind of atmosphere now, I think. I've also been to recently the women's games in Switzerland with the Euros.
Right. So that's where you live?
I live in Switzerland, again, a really different atmosphere on match day. So I live very close to the stadium in Geneva. It's a really different atmosphere.
And which team is this in Geneva that you would go and watch?
Well, then I was watching the Euros, but my local team is called Servette.
And that's a women's team.
No, that's the men's team.
That's the men's team, right? But you go to watch Servette games.
No, I don't. I don't go to watch Servette, but when there's games on, they're in my local town, and it reminds me of what it was like to be a kid walking through. We would walk through the streets in Everton around Goodison Park.
So, what are your observations then about watching Servette fans take over the town on match day? What's that like in relation to your experience growing up?
I mean, Switzerland, it's far more genteel, I would say.
Right.
It's a different, it's not that kind of, it's not the same level of energy. I think,
passion.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you see people wearing their tops, and there are occasions where, your local population swells, and you can really feel it, and you can hear it, of course. But there's a different kind of energy. And I think also there's a connection that you've got as a fan to the team that you support that is really different. You don't necessarily, you're just observing those fans. You're not connected to it in the way as when you're watching the game of the team that you really love.
So I learned something this weekend, because as we record this, I've just come back from the Arsenal parade, where they're now talking about it being the biggest civic accumulation of sporting fans in the history of sort of British culture. They're talking around numbers of like 1.2 million people being on the road in Islington, during that day, and having experienced the Liverpool parades on a couple of occasions with friends because I'm interested in football culture.
Yeah.
And we're a non-tribal football podcast. I think it's really interesting. It's great to say that you've got the biggest domestic fan base, or something like that. But what's really interesting about that is we were really swelled up, and interestingly, behind us at one point when we watched the bus go past, and we were at the bottom of the Blackstock Road in N5, there was a dad and his little girl behind me, right?
Yeah.
And she was tiny, and I was thinking, there's no way 1.2 million people are ever going to get to a football match.
No.
Right?
True.
Right? So what happens inside a football ground is not entirely relevant to people's experience of football and fan culture.
Yeah.
Actually, we got as much out of that experience, and I've said it was one of the greatest weekends of my entire life. And we lost the Champions League final the night before, but it didn't matter. I think I can speak for most Gooners everywhere. It didn't matter because what was happening for the following day was so much more important, because it's this collectivism.
Yeah, I mean, and like you say, well, you're in the stadium for just 90 minutes, but the connections are longer. Outside there's a different energy, but it's not just about that. It's about the connection throughout the week of the conversations that you have.
Yeah.
I mean, even in work now, you have to be resilient to quite a lot of banter if you're an Evertonian.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to be able to kind of roll with the punches with it.
Yeah.
But it's about that connection and that kind of kinship that you have with people. I mean, I do loads of work on diversity and inclusion, so I know you're not meant to be biased about people. And I always have to stop myself when someone says, I'm a Liverpool fan.
Yeah.
And I think, shame, I really liked you until that point. And of course, that's not true. I've got lots of friends that are Liverpool fans, but when I meet someone who's an Evertonian, it's, I'm Evertonian, and you've got that shared connection, which is really, it's different. That doesn't necessarily happen so strongly with other sports.
Our inaugural good companion was Neil Atkinson, who is the managing director of the Anfield Wrap and sort of the chief content contributor to that. And I yield to most things football related to Neil, because he's just so brilliant in terms of his articulation of the game and his knowledge of the game, but also his breadth of experience. But even he can't resist saltiness when it comes to the Blues.
I mean,
right?
It's totally ingrained in you.
Yeah.
I mean, and we have a connection to Everton that goes back a really long way. Mm-hmm. And Dad was brilliant in the early 80s. Everton were doing really well, and he'd hear all these kids that we would play with in the street that we lived in, and they'd say, I support Liverpool, and he'd go, does your dad take you to the match? And they'd go, no. He goes, tell you what, I'll take you to an Everton match.
Yeah.
And still, we're in a little WhatsApp group with Evertonians that Dad created.
Right.
Because he said, I'll take you to a match. I'll take you to the match with me, and then see what it's like. And then suddenly there's a whole bunch of Evertonians that he'd converted because they said they supported Liverpool. They'd never really been to a match.
But I did the same thing to my boys.
Yeah.
Right. I've done the same thing to my boys. Like they're both dyed in the wool Gooners with no explanation whatsoever.
Yeah.
It makes almost no sense at all. But their experience this weekend, plus my wife Kia, who comes from a purple family, right, of Reds and Blues.
Oh wow, yeah.
Now complete massive, Arsenal fan. The White Lion pub in West Kirby, we sort of mini took it over with the 3 or 4 other WhatsApp Mersey Gooners that we've got in our group, and it's The match is not the most important thing.
I agree, and I think like my dad's obviously an Evertonian, but so is his dad.
Yeah.
Right, and you know, you can stand on my grandfather's grave and look at Goodison Park.
Wow.
You know, so you know when Dad and I went to matches,
that's like Mecca for blues, right?
I mean,
I turn in this direction. I look at I stand on Mr. Hoskisson's grave. And it's there.
Yeah, except whenever we went to the match and we'd go to my grandfather's grave before a match, we inevitably lost. So I'm not sure it was like, you know, saying a prayer to the gods. I'm not sure they were rewarded that well.
Well, I'll tell you something else you said about saying a prayer to the gods, right? So when the Champions League penalty shootout was taking place, right? We'd been playing cards, waiting, like, because we watched it in a place called Little Sardinia on the Blackstock Road, right? Yeah. Which is an Italian restaurant run by Marcello, and it was an expat Sardinian, but is now died in the wool gooner. And Ali, his head waiter, is also a died in the wool gooner, and we're there playing Arsenal cards, right? And I am there, not even watching the penalty shootout, looking and kissing one of the king cards, because the king cards are all title-winning managers.
Okay.
And I thought, and so I picked out Herbert Chapman,
right?
Because my dad was a 1930s gooner,
right?
Right, and I was thinking, this is the only way I can make this work. I mean, we talk such shit.
Do you know what I mean? But again, it's tribal. There's kind of mythology associated with all of this stuff, and you know, and it kind of breeds, and these stories become part of your heritage.
Right.
You know, they're all part of a shared heritage, a shared tribalism, and I think that's what football's about. And you know, and it's interesting, kind of as a girl growing up, I didn't necessarily know exactly who was in the team. And you and I have talked about that before. Don't know exactly all the players. Don't understand always the tactics.
Yeah.
But I understand what my connection to the club is.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't make it any less or any more than anybody else. But it's still a, you know,
you've been
connection.
Spared the painful, you know, sort of thinking of like Peter Eastoe, Alan Biley, Alan Ainscough, and all those guys before Graham Sharp and Adrian Heath, you know, came in and did their thing.
These were icons when I grew up.
I can hear the halftime whistle going. So in the second half, we want to talk a little bit more about that grassroots stuff, but also about how football has kind of influenced your working life. So for the moment, Jane, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This show exists because people believed in what it could be before it was anything. J.B. Priestley wrote about football turning strangers into companions, a community built in 90 minutes. And that's the whole idea behind what we're doing here. And OSS Security got that straight away. Not just the podcast, but the point of it, the belonging, the conversations, the thing that football does to people when it's at its best. They came on board as believers in the show, in the vision, in what this community can become. They say, got you covered. And that's exactly how it feels for the show and for everyone who's part of it. So, whatever you need, whether that's for your business or for your home, simply knowing someone's looking out for you, well, they've got you covered. We're proud to have them with us on this journey, and you can find a link to them in the show notes to find out more. So, we haven't talked yet, and in the second half, I think we start by talking about your grassroots team, and your grassroots team is St Matthew's Football Club. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so they don't exist anymore actually, but the reason that I think about it is because it's linked to my grandfather.
Okay.
So my dad's dad, the one that said you can, you know.
Jim Hoskisson.
Jim Hoskisson.
Great
name, of course.
Yeah.
So, like my granddad Jim, basically in the early 60s, took over St Matthew's kind of junior, and with his friend Joe Hanna, they did the juniors and the seniors together.
Right.
You know,
so they ran the club.
They ran the club, and they turned around their fortunes as well. In that sense, you know, they were playing in the kind of like boys leagues and the senior leagues, and it's about purpose, isn't it? So it was really interesting because it was
community organisation.
Yeah. And I was asking some of my dad's cousins and friends about their recollections, because many of them played for St Matthew's.
Yeah.
You know, and what I really loved was hearing about how my granddad coached people.
Wow.
So one thing that just struck me as really interesting is he was still wearing the waistcoat before Gareth Southgate made it popular. So he was like turning up on a Saturday.
Knitted.
I don't know if it was knitted or not. I think it was proper formal suit waistcoat and his overcoat.
I need to say to the camera, right, by the way, right, Jane's brought her own researcher with her, right, because every time she looks off camera, she's looking at her dad. Right, and her dad's basically giving her a kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down because so much of our experience about football is, I like to call it rented memory.
Yes,
right?
Totally.
Because again, it goes back to that 1930s thing.
Yeah.
Right. Why should my sons, who were born in the noughties and the tweens, why would they have any perceived connectivity with a football club 200 miles away?
Yeah.
The architecture of that love was built on the success of a team that didn't even compete in European tournaments in the 1930s.
From 100 years ago nearly.
Yeah, because European tournaments didn't even exist in those days. Sorry, anyway, go on.
No, but I think it's about relationship. It's also, you talked about community, but it's about relationship. So, football has really helped me build a great relationship with my dad, who, as you say, is, kind of, him and I talk about football on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So we're always looking at the results and we're always kind of seeing,
Becomes a love language.
It is. That's a great expression. I know you've talked about that before. When maybe communication breaks down, football's a way of bridging a gap. Now, I'm super lucky. I have a great relationship with my dad.
Yeah.
But I think that's a shared experience, and it's unique to our relationship. It's not one shared with my mum and my brother, in the same way. Dad and I do genuinely talk about football, and we talk about the result and the pain of it as well, So going back to my grandfather, the piece around community, I think that was fantastic because what I heard was coaching, support, care for people. So providing young boys who would have otherwise had not much else to do with a place to go, things to do and focus, and they're all really, really important things. And I think grassroots football now has such an important role to play. And from what I hear, we still don't do necessarily enough on the grassroots piece, particularly for girls.
Well, there's a couple of things. So I wrote a piece on LinkedIn, because every week I write a piece related to the content of Football for Breakfast pod, because what we think sets our podcast apart from other football-based content pieces is that we're trying to have firstly, we believe that the listener can be the next guest, but ultimately it's about that relationship that football has in its broader sense.
Yeah.
Because yes, I'm interested in your relationship with Everton Football Club, but that relationship with St Andrews that doesn't even St Matthews that doesn't even exist anymore. Is so relevant, because the piece that I wrote at the time we're recording this is about state of the adult grassroots game.
Right.
Now, I want to come back to the women's
Yeah.
football thing because it's so relevant right now.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's in a lot better shape than people realise. It's probably it's probably in better shape now. Look, there's a ways to go with it.
Yeah.
Right. And you only have to look at what's happening in tennis at the moment. With the sort of the challenging of the equity of prize money and things like that. And I again, as we're recording this, Roland Garros had its first nighttime women's singles match, because they're the marquee games, and finally
they've put them on.
They've put them on.
Yeah.
So some it may be slow progress, but it is progress.
Progress is progress, right? Any progress is progress in the right direction.
Yeah.
That's kind of really important.
But in terms of the community, I'm really interested in that community organisation piece, because 33,000 men's grassroots teams like 5 years ago, and now there's only 30,000. So and if that continues to fall, there is a real problem, and it's part of the reason is those community organisers, I think, don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And
I think you've got to be really vested in your community to want to put in the time, because it's not an insignificant time commitment. I mean, my grandfather would have been training with the boys like a couple of nights a week.
Yeah.
And then his Saturday or his Sunday is taken up with the games.
Yeah,
You know, but there's a whole back office, but behind that, like, you know, so, you know, there's plenty of people that are kind of washing the kit. So my grandma would have washed the kit occasionally when it was like his turn to take care of that. It's not like I turn up, there's a couple of hours, I've filled my time, and then I go. I have to think about the logistics. I have to think, and one of the things now with the kids is you've got to think about care and how you're providing them with the right level of care in those games, which is totally appropriate. But then, you know, you've got many people are working full time. You know, you get into very quickly into, it's not just about the sport, it's about the politics and the economics that surround it.
Well,
also really important consideration.
Well, I think it's really interesting because, and again, going back to that, there are less clubs around than there once were, grassroots clubs. My Sunday league team that I played for no longer exists. And the reason why it no longer exists is partly because the people get old and, you know, there's no community organiser that's willing to pick it up. But more importantly, the league doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So the league is disbanded. The Ellesmere Port Sunday League doesn't just isn't there anymore. And then similarly, the greatest fun and experience I ever had playing grassroots football was towards the end of my playing time. When I played for a team that were ultimately organised originally by a cricket team that wanted to do something in the winter.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So it's complementary sports.
Complementary sports, and then what happened? What happened there was the team that the players that inherited it got better and decided that they wanted to go and play in a league.
Right.
And we were a Corinthians team, so we only ever played organised friendlies and then some knockout tournaments and some round robin tournaments. And I can remember saying to the secretary, who's a good friend of mine and still plays, he's an England international, make a great podcast guest. He plays for the England over 65. He's still playing now. Amazing, right?
Really important.
But I remember him telling me that they joined the league. And I said, that'll be the death knell of that club.
Yeah.
And the reason why it'll be the death knell of the club, because the ethos was all wrong.
Yeah.
And because those young men who don't really want to play that regularly or concede the sort of the longevity of it, they're all going to go off and have children and things like that, and they'll find other things to do. I mean, it was and then it depends.
But then I think you also, you know, that again, you need like different things for different types of people. So not everybody has to be professional. Not everybody has to be in this really competitive league. You know, actually, when you think about right at the core of football, it's about having fun. I mean, you know, when we were at school, football, what was it? Jumpers for goalposts. It's a real thing because actually, if you've got a ball, you can just kick it around, and it's not about winning all the time, you know. And it's about a whole set of life skills that you learn through football. It's about being part of a team. It's not about winning, you know. And you could say, well, there's a lot more individualism now. In the way that we do things, the way that we engage. So maybe there's not so much kind of ability to connect with people on the football field.
See, I think football has done one thing that's been amazing for football, but not so great for other forms of cultural sort of connectivity, in the sense that footballers at the top level now are like rock stars.
Oh yeah, incredible.
Right, and in many ways, and they've superseded everybody because the attention that they get now is extraordinary.
And the power that comes with that too. The power and the responsibility that comes with that too.
I mean, like, I did want to sort of talk a little bit about you know, the work that you're doing, because you work in HR.
Yes, I do.
Right. And it's in the aviation space.
Yes.
Right. And one of your kind of primary you know, functions as an ethos is to get more women into aviation, which is really kind of, there are so many parallels with football there. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So aviation is notoriously male dominated. I mean, you know, if you ask most children, like the gender of it's very gendered. So gender of a pilot and the gender of cabin crew, they generally fall down the lines of, you know, a pilot is male and cabin crew is female. And the reality is absolutely borne out in the data. So back in 2019, we started an initiative called 25 by 2025, and the idea was to improve the baseline metric, by 25% by 2025. So if you imagine you've got 4% female pilots, it's really low. Just increasing it by 25% takes it to 5%. Okay, but that actual and practical terms is talking about 100,000 women globally that you get to be pilots. Actually, we exceeded that target. We're at 6.4%, I think now,
Wow.
female pilots around the world, which is, I think is a real testament to a couple of things. It's to leaders who say this is really important. We need both. We need everybody to make a plane safe. It's just that boys have seen more clear role models, and girls haven't seen it. And I always say that you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
And so when you get on a plane and you hear a female voice, it's like, great, a female pilot. And I feel inspired to want to do that. So girls see it and they say that's a job that I can do. And I think it's the same for football. When I was growing up, nobody had heard of female footballers that were making like a big scene. And I think even now, I was talking to some colleagues, they've got girls who love football. They love playing football with their brothers.
Yeah.
There's 3 of them in the team.
Yeah.
And they feel overwhelmed and they haven't got a safe place to go play.
Yeah.
We need to provide more opportunities for people because, the world, I always think Mother Nature kind of gets it right.
Yeah.
She settles the world around 49%, 51%. Right, so whatever kind of magic happens with Mother Nature, she gets it right.
Yeah.
Well, that can be reflected in the world of work and the world of sport. And I think aviation is very, very similar to football in that there's not been a predominance of women there. Now, there's some structural things that need to be addressed. It's not just about like, let's wave a magic wand, and it's not about giving women jobs. It's about, of course, at the heart of everything is meritocracy.
Yeah.
But you also have to look at what structurally is in play.
And they need to be seen, right?
They need to be seen. And so the work that we've done is all about kind of giving visibility to that. And the results show for themselves. The fact that we have increased, I work for a trade association, and we had, in 2019, 3% of our population of CEOs were female. It's now at 9%. I mean, that's a massive difference in a 6-year period. And I think it's because people have said, well, actually, there are no reasons why women can't do the CEO job. Yeah. So again, it's exposure and getting people used to it and recognizing that, I think there's always a fallacy when you talk about diversity. People turn off and they go, oh, this is just about women's rights. It's about everybody's rights. And it's about bringing everybody to the table, because women have got some brilliant skills that men struggle to possess. Men have got some amazing skills that women don't necessarily have as naturally. And you need both. Now, that's kind of a really important example for me around that visibility. So visibility is everything.
Okay. We ask everybody to bring a artefact with them. And I'm just looking at your artefact there, and it is, well, I'm going to hold it if you mind. And I'm going to describe it to people who are listening to this in their cars or not watching it as a video piece. So what I'm looking at here is what feels like a Bakelite shield. People, I love Bakelite. I don't know what is Bakelite, right? But it's I don't think it's plastic, and it's an award really, and it's got well, I'm going to read it out. It says on it, Sarsfield Cup, St Matthews, 1961-62. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so this is from, this is my grandfather's from when he was running St Matthews, and it's been in our house ever since I can remember. It's actually comes with another part of the artefact, which we talked about, and he's in the background, which is my dad. Yeah. He's my live artefact that links to football. So, and again, it's back to that linkage. It's, these are memories from many, many years ago about people who impact your lives. There's an expression which I love, which is people die twice. Yeah. They die once when they take their last breath. Yeah. And they die for the second time when the last person says their name.
Yeah.
Right. And so my granddad's still alive here
Yeah.
because we were talking about him.
Yeah.
You know, and I kind of think, how cool is that? You know, Dad and I went this morning to the new stadium.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you kind of think, well, these are people that live in your memories. And again, that's what football's about. It's about connection. It's about memories, family. It's about loyalty.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I am loyal to Everton.
Yeah.
Because that's what's also been ingrained in me.
I mean, there's not a lot else I can say about that, really. I'm going to leave that just there because I don't think anybody's articulated that. And I mean, sometimes it feels a little bit like self-help sitting in the greasy spoon. Because
I hope it isn't.
Well, no, I think because for me, I've been on a big journey recently because Arsenal are the current champions, and my relationship with Arsenal Football Club has no fathomability other than the fact that it was my connection with my late dad, who I lost when I was really, really young.
Yeah.
And that thing about they die twice, right? Now, none of my children, all three of them, have ever met my dad,
No.
have ever seen him in a video, they've never heard his voice. And to be honest with you, it's a distant memory in my mind.
Yeah.
In my mind.
You were very, very young.
Very, very young, right? But we were talking about tattoos the other day.
Right.
Right. So I have the 1971 Arsenal shirt as a reproduction of the Charlie George shirt, and it's got the FA Cup on it and the cannon in 1971.
Yeah.
Right. Now
Right,
I was
yeah,
born
obviously.
2 days after that happened.
Right.
Right. Well, my best friend, who died in a road accident,
Yeah.
was born on that day. And if I was ever going to get a tattoo, I think that would be the one, because it would also
Connect.
have some kind of connectivity with his memory.
Yeah.
Right.
And honestly, that's what football's about. It's about connection.
It is. And he was a terrible blue nose as well.
He was a great guy.
Right. So anyway, we're now at the penalty shootout, right? Because it's kind of full time.
Oh.
Right. These are these are quick fire questions. I get to decide whether they go over the bar, whether it was a stuttery Eberiche Eze style penalty. You know, but we respect the guys that stand up and take the penalty.
Okay,
Right.
great.
Okay. So
I take them
okay, home or away?
home.
Okay. Interesting, because you've flown in for this podcast from Geneva and you said home. Where is home?
Geneva.
There you go. Right, okay. So it's Servette, right? Okay.
No, honestly, I went to the stadium
you
this
did,
morning
you
and
did.
it was pulled on my heartstrings.
Does it? Okay, so I'm going to have to pause that there and just sort of say we're going to have to just scrutinise that very quickly. Does that feel like home?
You know, it was incredible to go and to feel, okay, this is our new home.
It's beautiful.
It's stunning.
It's
And I
beautiful.
love all the detail that's gone into the construction of it. It's thoughtfully constructed. I particularly love that you can stand in the shop and you can see Everton.
Yeah.
Like you can see the kind of like foundation
So
of where
there's
Everton
there's
comes from.
two beautiful things about what you've just said, right? Firstly, I think what they've done, just in terms of the architecture and where it sits,
Yeah.
by the Titanic Hotel, it's on the Dock Road, and it's retained all of the beautiful sandstone facade and all
Yeah.
of that, and it's got the beautiful banks
Yeah.
and the water.
Yeah.
And the industry that still remains in the area, and you've got the fantastic tobacco warehouse and all of that. You know, the single biggest brick-built building
Yes,
up until where the Empire State went up, which is there's just some insane
Yeah, it's true.
stories around that, and the fact that Everton chose to go there. The fact that for whatever reason behind the scenes, they have retained Goodison Park as the home of Everton women's
Just love
football.
it.
It's
Love
just incredible.
When-
Isn't that not the tribute to that little girl?
Yes, I honestly, when that was announced, I had little goosebumps because I just thought this is like absolutely perfect. It's a perfect round circle of football.
And what I would say in addition to that is that over the last 2 weekends, we've obviously spent a lot of time around N5,
Yeah.
right? And we could not help but go to Highbury.
Yes.
Now, Highbury is half a mile away from the Emirates on
Yeah.
foot, right? And Highbury just sort of appears out of nowhere in that community. And I think the fact that they went through the pain, and all the pain has gone away, by the way, all those 22 years, all the reasons why they moved there, that self-sustaining model. Arsenal apparently have made more money this year than any other Premier League team as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
It's a lot to do with those 1.2 million people, though.
Yeah,
none of those people are ever got to Highbury and will ever get to the Emirates.
No.
Because you're just locked out.
Yeah.
But it's
connection.
Absolutely.
That was a long penalty.
That was a long penalty. Well, I think we had to pause and get the referee involved. Watching or playing?
I mean, I've never really played, so I'm going to say watching.
Best captain?
You know, he's only a captain occasionally.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say Pickford.
Okay.
Right, because I think he shows leadership on the field, and a captain isn't always about having the band. I think there's times where he shows incredible leadership. I mean, obviously there's some captains from the 80s that you would say, like Kevin Ratcliffe, but I would say Pickford is the captain that we've never really had.
Yeah, right, fair enough. Great answer, by the way. VAR or nah?
I mean, I'm doing a lot of research on kind of AI and stuff. I mean, VAR with human in the loop every time.
Okay. Yeah, I change my mind consistently and on this one. And finally, international friendlies or pre-season friendlies.
I mean, I went a couple of years ago. Everton played in Neon by the UEFA stadium, and I went to see them, and I mean it was just toe-curlingly terrible. But I'm always going to say international because I live a very international life, and I think it's really great to go see your team play in a completely different environment.
So international friendlies.
Love it. And probably not many people say that, I guess.
Well, no, actually, I mean, as I listen to these, I wonder whether or not we have to change the questions. But it doesn't. The changes are there, and I think we learn a lot about some of the central core component issues with football, like VAR being one of them. The notion of friendlies as a thing. Yeah. When there's so much football, I mean, it's almost a 12-month sport now. You know, you wouldn't get Roy Race playing cricket in the summer anymore. You know, not when his wife's having a baby. Anyway,
you'd have to be there for the photo shoot.
If I recall, I mean, I don't want Roy's family phoning me up accusing me of like slander, but I seem to remember that Penny Race was Roy's secretary. Right. No, and I'd like to know what our HR professional would have to say about that.
She would say, talk to HR.
Yes, exactly. One result that you'll never get over. It doesn't have to be football.
Oh, I mean, I have got a football one. I mean, we've had a couple of really terrible seasons, and I would say it was a couple of years ago, and we were playing Crystal Palace, and we were 2-0 down. And if we'd lost, it meant that on that final Saturday of the season, or Sunday of the season, we would go down. And we came back from 2-0 down to go 3-2 up, right? But of course, I'm not here. I'm not watching it live. I'm watching it on tedious BBC Sport text messages.
I love that.
And the other detail is my battery on my phone is going, so I'm stuck in my car because it's the only place I can get power. And I'm watching it, and because the fans invaded the pitch, it was 7 painful minutes of extra time, making sure, and it was just like, I will always remember it because it was really, really hot in Geneva, and I couldn't go anywhere because I needed to know what the game was, and then, you know.
That's the modern footballer's first world problem.
It really is.
It is the modern football fan's first world problem, because when you think about it, right, back in the day, and again, this has come up a lot on this podcast, this idea that you would get your results off the Vidi printer or the telly printer.
And the Liverpool and the Echo.
The Pink Echo.
The Pink Echo on a Saturday night.
Not just, and then games that weren't televised on the radio, right? You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a different world when you think about it.
But these days, it's all like tout tickets and snide sticks. You know, but there we are. There is one other thing to say. So there's a little thing in the middle there, and that's for you.
Right.
If you like pick it up and read it out for me.
Football for breakfast, good companion, 25 to 26.
I don't think there's anything other than to say, Jane Hoskisson, thank you for being such a good companion.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Jim. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Jane Hoskisson, proof that the most important work in aviation or football is making sure people can see themselves in the picture. Football for Breakfast is a production by The Good Companions, presented by OSS Security. They've got you covered at osssecurity.com.